All right, so let's take a look at number 7 here on this worksheet. And just to give you an example of what it looks like if we're trying to solve equations using completing the square. So when we complete the square, remember, we're looking for a perfect square trinomial. And if we don't have it, we're going to manipulate our problem to make it a perfect square. So, again, it all starts with b, with 14 in this case. And so to make it a perfect square, we need to know what half of b is and square it. So half of 14 is 7, and 7 squared is 49. And negative 15 isn't 49. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move 15 to the other side of the equation, and I need to make a blank spot to put 49, because that would make this a perfect square trinomial. So it's add 15 to both sides, and then I'll have x squared plus 14x plus something equals 15. And again, we know that something we want is 49, so let's put it in there. And now I have a perfect square trinomial, but of course, whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other, so I add 49 to the other side, which would give me on the left x plus 7 squared equals, and then 15 plus 49 is 64. And to solve for x, we have to get rid of the square, so we square root both sides. So I'll get x plus 7 equals plus or minus 8. Because remember, if I take the square root of a number and I add the square root myself, it's going to be either a positive or a negative. And so I have two different equations to figure out what x equals. I have x plus 7 equals positive 8, and x plus 7 equals negative 8. So, to get x by itself, we subtract 7. And in the first equation, I'll go to x equals 1. In the second equation, I subtract 7, and x equals negative 15. So, those are my two answers for solving for x, completing the square. Now, our next example that we have here, number 8, notice how I always have a perfect square when I square root the number. What if that doesn't happen? Let's investigate here with number 8. So, again, we look at number 12 because that's b, and we want to create the ideal situation so that we can have a perfect square trinomial. And so we take half of 12, which is 6, and 6 squared equals 36. So 23 isn't 36, so let's move the 23 over by subtracting it, and then we'll get k squared minus 12k plus something equals negative 23. And again, the something we want is 36 because we want half of b squared. So we plug in 36, and whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. Now let's go ahead and make our perfect square trinomial on the left, which would give us k minus 6 squared. And on the right-hand side, negative 23 plus 36 is 13. All right, and then to get k by itself, we take the square root of both sides, which will leave me k minus 6 on that side. And because I'm taking the square root, I added it myself. I have a plus and minus sign. But again, square root of 13, unless you have a calculator that can give you a decimal, square root of 13 is not a perfect square. So I'm going to leave it the square root of 13. And I know some of you are like, no, why not pull out a calculator? We know that you can use a calculator. So you can just plug it into a calculator and get a decimal. We can leave it like this to keep it what we call exact, because we don't have to round if we leave it as a square root. So, again, because of the plus minus sign, I have two different equations I need to make. One of them is k minus 6 equals positive square root 13, and the other equation is k minus 6 equals negative square root 13. And to get k by itself, we add 6 to both sides. And notice how, again, can I add 6 and square root of 13? No, because 13 is in the square root. So all I can do, if I don't have a calculator and I don't want to use a calculator, just write them right next to each other, 6 plus the square root of 13. And for the bottom equation, we add 6, and we're going to get 6 minus the square root of 13. So those are my answers. Again, I know you can plug in square root of 13 and get a decimal, but this leaves it exact, and then we don't have to pull the calculator, and I can still see that you're doing the work properly. So that is how you complete the square and solve quadratic equations.